Welcome to Believe. My name is Nikola Upchurch. It's an honor to have such a special guest with us tonight. It's tonight in Miami and Singapore. It's 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon. And you know, here at Believe, our website is www.believe.love, and we are a positive news network, but we also are willing to address the tough truth. And our guest today is Jim Rogers, and Jim Rogers is a legendary investor. He's a native of Alabama. He's an author, a financial commentator, an adventurer, a successful international investor, as I mentioned. He's been in Time, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Forbes, Fortune, the Wall Street Journal. He's also appeared as a regular commentator and columnist in various media and has been a professor at Columbia University. And Jim started trading the stock market with $600 in 1968. In 1973, he formed the Quantum Fund with the legendary investor George Soros before retiring a multimillionaire at the age of 37. And Jim also went around the world on a Guinness World Record journey through 116 countries. And that's so awesome. He's the author of Street Smarts, Adventures on the Road and in the Markets. Jim, welcome to the show, sir.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Nicholas. Not that it matters that much, but I also went around the world on a motorcycle.
Oh,
both of those trips got me in Guinness records, but it's not important. Go ahead, let's talk.
That's very important. Now, you wrote a book about that as well, didn't you?
I did. It was called Investment Biker. The second trip around the world in a car was called Adventure Capitalist. But I will tell you, Nicholas, being in the Guinness Book of Records is nice. My mother liked it. It does not pay the bills.
Well, I can tell you're riding a bike now. So I'm just amazed at that. I mean, your young age, you're still very active, aren't you, sir?
Yeah, so far I'm too busy not to be active.
Well, one thing I like about you, Jim, you know, we try to help people succeed here at Believe, and we're trying to help people to find the truth if we can. And you kind of tell it like it is. You kind of, from what I understand, you sort of you think for yourself. That's one of the main things I've heard you talk about. I've really followed you. You think for yourself. You encourage people to do that. In fact, I guess when you started your career in Wall Street, you realized the people above you in Wall Street, they didn't necessarily maybe know what they were talking about. When you kind of started to think for yourself, you started to get ahead. Is that correct?
Well, that's true. At first, I assumed everybody, since they were older and more experienced, probably better educated, knew what they were doing. Didn't take me too long to find out that they didn't know what they were doing, and I better figure it out for myself if I wanted to survive.
Well, now, if we're talking about kind of what's going on today in terms of money and business, it seems to me there's some kind of phantom economics going on, and it's even popular with sort of very wealthy people where, you know, it's not really based on fundamentals. The stock market's really run up recently. We have a tremendous amount of debt. It seems like we're not really addressing our problems. And earlier in the year, you mentioned that indeed governments love to control everything, and we're going to face possibly the worst economic crisis of anyone living's lifetime. Institutions are going to fail, governments could fail, and more. And so, I heard actually a quote when you're talking, I think to Steve Forbes, if you're not worried, you're not knowledgeable. So Jim, how bad will this be, and what should people do to prepare?
Well, Nicholas, that may sound dramatic, but let me say to you, we had a big problem in 2008, which you may remember,
Sure.
And it was the worst in most of our lifetimes. Well, since then, Nicholas, the debt has gone much, much, much higher. That problem was caused by too much debt. Since then, the debt everywhere is much, much higher than it was then. It stands to reason that the next time we have a problem, it's going to be worse. Now, Nicholas, we've had problems in America, to use America. We've had problems every 4 to 8 years since the beginning of the Republic. We don't have to have problems every 4 to 8 years, but we always have, nearly always have. So I suggest you we're going to have another one, and when the next one comes, it's going to be the worst we've ever seen. Now, Nicholas, I have to alert you. The government in Washington says we're not ever going to have a problem again, and that we don't have to worry about that. So if you take your advice from the central bank in Washington, D.C., you should be ignoring me completely But if you believe them, there's never going to be a problem again. And you should ignore me. I happen to go back through history. I know that that has never happened in any country in the history of the world. But in Washington, they tell you all sorts of things.
Well, that's right. And Jim, I actually believe you. I mean, we're accumulating debt. It seems like debt is used to possibly control people. I don't know. It's seems a little bit interesting. But what should people do to prepare, and what is the solution, do you think, to all this? And actually, what will replace these institutions that fail in your mind? Will this actually be good for the world down the line, potentially, if all this kind of clears out, or will just the same thing happen again and we won't learn from our mistakes?
Well, it's usually good when things are cleared out. Nicholas, when you have a forest fire, it's terrible at the time, but it cleans out the underbrush, it cleans out the dead wood, and then after the forest fire, everything grows better and everybody's better off. We had, in 2008, we lost Bear Stearns, which had been around for over 90 years. We lost Lehman Brothers, which had been around over 150 years. The world can go on, and it will go on. That's part of what capitalism is all about. You sort out the people who aren't succeeding, and you start over with the people that are. It's always worked that way. It will be that way again. Now, it's not good if you're one of those who fails, and I hope I'm not one of those who fails next time. But for the rest of us, it's good to clean out mistakes and start over again.
Well, that makes perfect sense. A lot of people, we don't know, a lot of people are kind of saying, hey, listen, the universities aren't giving us all the information that we might need necessarily, especially when it might come to the deeper issues that might be going on. For example, there's a lot of people that might say everything's great. I tend to believe you. So if the universities, let's say they're doing the best they can, maybe that's the best case scenario, or whatever's going on with that, how can people, the average person, educate themselves and prepare if they might not be getting the full picture sometimes from the universities, from mainstream news?
Well, first, Nicholas, I would discuss, or maybe even disagree, that the American universities are they are doing the best they can, but it's not very good, not a very good job. A survey showed recently that 50% of recent university graduates in the U.S. cannot read an editorial and tell you what it said. They cannot read a credit card offering and tell you what they're being offered. So American education, university education, has a great PR, great reputation, but the results are not really there. What they're teaching in America these days is a lot of political correctness. I mean, it's just embarrassing. I went to Yale University and had a wonderful time there, but recently Yale University, believe it or not, went and censored. There was an old sculpture of the Pilgrims. Wow. You remember the Pilgrim Fathers? Sure. One of them was with an Native American Indian, and the Indian had a bow and arrow. The Pilgrim had a rifle, which you would expect in 1620, 1625, whatever it was. Well, Yale University had huge committees and everybody else, and they censored the Pilgrim and his rifle. Now, somebody at that university is making a lot of money, and a lot of time and energy is being consumed, and they all had these meetings and discussions about, oh my gosh, we have a sculpture of a pilgrim with a rifle. What are we going to do? Now, I submit to you that we all could have better uses of our time than that. But what should people do? The only thing you can do is to stay with what you know yourself. Everybody listening and watching this knows a lot about something, whether it's sports or cars or fashion, whatever it is. So don't be listening to me or anybody else as to what to do with your money. You stay with what you know. Don't take hot tips from the radio, the internet, the TV, newspapers, or anywhere else. When you see something happening in fashion, if that's what you're knowledgeable about, spend a lot of time. If you know it's going to be successful, find out what to do, who's doing it. Make sure you're right, that they're going to be successful, and that's where you put your money. If you start listening to hot tips, Nicholas, you're going to lose everything you have, especially when things start going wrong. And Nicholas, if you don't know something to do with your money, if you haven't found something that you know a lot about at the moment, do nothing. Just wait. Put your money in the bank. It's better to earn a little bit of interest over time than it is to lose a lot over time when you don't know what you're doing. And I would repeat to you, I'm sorry, just to interrupt one more time. Repeat to you what I said to Steve Forbes, and he is knowledgeable, but if you're not knowledgeable, if you're not worried, it means you're not knowledgeable. So get knowledgeable first.
That's right. I heard also that you mentioned the people who may be driving Lamborghinis in the future would be the farmers. Is that right? And instead of working on Wall Street, that people should learn, or at the, I think it was in London, their equivalent of Wall Street, people need to kind of get into sort of, I think you said they're real goods, right? Sort of real commodities, right?
Well, we've had huge cycles over the centuries, over the millennia, that at times the people who produce real goods are masters of the universe. At times it's the financial types. I've seen it in my lifetime. I've certainly seen it in the last 100 years or so. The people on Wall Street have been kings and queens for the last 30-odd years. Farmers have been a disaster. That's in the process of changing, and I said we're gonna have the worst of financial markets in my lifetime coming up because of debt and other reasons. So the people who are in finance are going to give way to the people producing real goods, especially farmers.
You also mentioned, Jim, Yale, and I went to University of Michigan. In fact, I played football before that at University of Central Florida and then at Michigan. The best game that I actually played in a lot was against Alabama, in your great state of Alabama. Now, you were instead collecting bottles. Sports could be a big diversion for men to not pay attention to all these things that are going on. But I was involved with sports. But you mentioned Yale, you mentioned some censorship. And that is a big, of course, George Washington, different people were slave owners. I mean, that's the way it was. But if we talk about world news, and we need some people to talk some sense into us, and that's why my dream guest was Jim Rogers, because he's very wise, he's willing to tell the truth. So I need to get your take on something, Jim. People seem to be entrenched in lies all over the world, layers and layers of lies. The degree could be debated and whatever you're talking about, but a bunch of monkey business is going on. Endless wars, division, bickering, governments hiding things. What they're hiding could be debated. Trillions of dollars the Pentagon lost track of just before 9/11. They came out, they publicly acknowledged it. Who knows where it went? I mean, people have documentaries now about black budget, unacknowledged special access projects, Dr. Stephen Greer. But the bottom line is there's a lot of nonsense going on. So what do we do about all these possible lies, or this possible, maybe even, I don't know for sure, but maybe even orchestrated division? How do we actually trace back through to the true agendas and sort out, what's just false and what's a conspiracy theory and what's real, and how do we forgive people and bring them together at the very top?
Well, the first point is that in my view, I'm living in Singapore right now.
Sure.
So we get sometimes a distant view or an objective view of our own country because we're not right there day to day. But it is very evident. The facts are that America is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. That's not somebody's belief or opinion. You just look it up. No country in world history has ever been as deeply in debt as we are in the United States. Now, if I were, well, I am very concerned about that, and I would wish that people in America would say, wait a minute, guys, we got some very, very serious problems here. We got to deal with it. What do we do about all of this debt, which is going higher and higher and higher? I don't think there's any question that America's had more wars in the last 17 years, just in this century, is the point, than any other country. We keep winding up with wars with people, and Mr. Trump seems to want some more wars.
Jim just had to grab some water. He's out biking. I'm amazed by his stamina. Jim, go ahead, if you'd like, about what you were saying, I think really about the U.S. government and kind of what's really going on in the world out there.
Well, Nicholas, I was saying, America's the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. The debts are going higher and higher. Nobody's doing anything about it. We've had several wars. just in this century alone, which is only 17 years old. And Mr. Trump says he's going to have some more wars. I mean, we don't have a good education system anymore. Infrastructure is falling apart. I mean, we have some gigantic problems in America. We spend more on health care than anybody else in the world by a factor of 3 or 4 times, and we're not even in the top 25 for life expectancy. The things that we're spending our time on, the politicians and academics, back to them, is mind-boggling to me. Nobody seems to be addressing the serious problems that we're all facing.
I would agree with you. I think that, you know, it's something interesting. If we really start to trace it to the top, maybe even above the governments. And, you know, I think a lot of people, no matter what's going on, there seems to be some influence, something going on where, for example, I don't know that Mr. Trump, Mr. Obama, I don't know that, and if you listen to Ron Paul, and I met Ron Paul as well, I'm a big fan, I think maybe you are as well. I met him in Orlando, but if, you know, there seems to be, you know, he talked about the one-party system, actually. There was a one-party system. But how can we get these people at the top, maybe even influencing Mr. Trump or the, you know, the military that's just entrenched in also having to make money? And part of it, maybe it's not their fault. It just becomes such a big business. How can we get people to come together and forgive and kind of get to the bottom of all this, these smoke and mirrors, this manufactured conflict? You know, what can we do about that?
Well, first, people would be, whenever people are prosperous, there's usually a lot of joy and glee and happiness in a country, and they're not sitting around in big political battles. So we've got to get the economy under control. To do that, we have to do something about the debt, as I said, with the largest debtor nation in world history. And Nicholas, many studies show that when you have a lot of debt, it's hard to grow at a rapid rate because you got this debt looking over your shoulder. You're dragging along huge amounts of debt. It's common sense, and it's been studied many, many times. So America's got to face its first fundamental problem. The Pentagon even says, you know, the debt burden in America is now a problem for national defense as well.
That's right.
Because we do have these staggering debts, and we owe the rest of the world a lot of money, and that could hurt us badly if we have more defense problems. So we got to deal with our economic problems first. Then maybe we can start sorting out some of the other. We would start sorting out some of the other problems. As I say, people who are prosperous are usually happy, and their kids are happy. Everybody's having a good time. They're all going to dinner and drinking beer and dancing or whatever they're doing. That's not the case in the U.S. right now.
You're right. I think, and actually you said if people aren't afraid, they're not knowledgeable. I think there's actually a lot of fear being sold, but it's the wrong kind of fear, maybe taking people's eye off the ball a little bit. Constant bickering and arguments about parties, and, you know, here, I like all the parties. But the interesting thing is, to get to the bottom of this economy and sort it out, even a lot of Republicans that said they wanted to balance the budget, I don't know that they really do. And Ron Paul talks about that as well. And I'd love to ask you about something that's really interesting to me about your life, because you have so much wisdom, and I'm so honored to talk to you. Of course, you worked with a guy that I don't know, George Soros, and he's often in the news for things, funding movements, maybe things some people say could destabilize governments. I know that you maybe have said that you'd like to see the IMF and the World Bank demolished. George Soros seems like he may have gone in a different direction, kind of. It's just interesting. You guys work together. I don't know him. I know you do. But you seem to be on ideological, sort of different paths that you went. Almost polar opposites.
Yes, but I haven't seen or spoken to Soros in over 38 years.
Sure.
Might as well ask me about my first wife. I mean, about him, call him. I have absolutely no clue. So I say it's been over 38 years. So
sure.
Sorry, I cannot help you just because I don't know.
No, that's no problem. It's very interesting, and no matter what's going on there with George, of course, I don't know him either. I mean, if good or bad things, we want to forgive people here. We want to try to bring people like Jim and George together to solve this crap going on. I really think that people like Jim and George, if we could get them together, if they are on polar opposite ends of the spectrum, and kind of try to harmonize this thing at the top, because I do think there are some things above the government that are happening. And so, Jim, how can we improve as a species? I mean, people look up to you. You're tremendously successful. You've been around the world. You're healthy. I mean, I don't know. You look like maybe 45. I think you may be a little older. I'm not sure. I hope I'm as active as you. But you have it all. How can we become better? Our entire goal here at this network is to harmonize the tough things in the world, to forgive people and governments, and if they do have hidden things, and move forward. How can we harmonize things at the corporate level and get all the agendas out in front of everyone to see? Ask maybe any secret societies to open up, and we always have these hidden agendas as humans. So how can we become better, Jim, and become more honest?
Well, first of all, I'm certainly older than you say I look, and I do look older. I was 47 when I went around the world on a motorcycle.
Wow!
So it was years ago. So, and I would like to go again, but that's an entirely different question. Well, the part of the problem is, of course, that Washington is full of entrenched lobbyists, politicians, bureaucrats who've been there forever. So part of the problem is Washington. Mr. Trump, for instance, said, I'm going to make things better with Russia. He gets to Washington and everybody's in this gigantic fight about Russia. He says, I'm going to do something about North Korea. I'm going to sit down with a kid and have a hamburger. Now he's thinking about bombing North Korea. I don't know how suddenly somebody who goes down there and promises us he's going to change things for the better, next thing he's just as bad as the rest of them. Now, I don't know if that's Washington having an effect. I think it probably is partially that. Many of us elect congressmen and senators who are perfectly wonderful people who shop at the same supermarkets, send their kids to the same schools. Then they get to Washington and something happens. They're not the same person anymore. One of the things I suggested in one of my books was that we not send these guys to Washington. You know, nobody would set up a government in 2017 where everybody goes to the same place to meet. You do it all online. You and I are having a meeting online.
That's right.
Interviews online. People all over the world now. Yeah, Africa, Siberia, everywhere. They all meet online. They have conferences. They vote. They do everything else. So sending them to Washington is the first problem. If all of our congressmen had to go down to the local high school gym or the mayor's office or somewhere and vote, you know, so that we could all watch them and watch it all online, I think, first of all, the corroding and corrupting influence of Washington would be out of our lives. I promise you, if I'm a congressman and my plumber sitting over there and the school teacher sitting over there, my views are probably going to be a lot different from if a lobbyist is over there and another lobbyist is over there watching me vote. So Washington is part of it. People go to Washington as perfectly wonderful people, and something happens to them and they change. That is probably the first place to start. We have to do something about the system that has been very corroded. You know, in 1789, they came up with a great idea. It worked. We became the most successful country in the 20th century, but now it's gone the other way.
Well, you said lobbyists. That was the key word that I noticed there, and it does seem to be about the big money, and I don't know if there's a lot of money getting thrown around with efficiency sometimes, right? Sometimes maybe there's more money for some people and it's inefficient on purpose, maybe. Who knows? Because it sounds really good. What do you think about that?
Well, Nicholas, I was just about to say, you know, the way it works in Washington, when they call for a vote, all the senators or the congressmen go there, and you go down the hall, and all these lobbyists there waving, don't forget me, you know, or the lobbyists are talking to their assistants saying, well, now we're going to have a vote about this bill. Don't forget me. It's a whole lot of pressure on them right up to the very time they vote. As I say, if the guy were in his hometown and the plumber and the carpenter and the policeman were there, they might have a different view instead of all these lobbyists putting their hands into their pockets and telling them what to do.
Well, I would agree with you. In terms of that big money, you know, how can we get these big businesses, because it's just a food chain, right? The lobbyists, and then at the top, there are people, they have their agendas, and you know what? They're companies, and then their job is to make money. The board's job for the shareholders to make money, and until you know the agendas of the board, you probably really don't know what the real agenda is. And so how can we, you know, somebody had an idea, hey, Nikola Tesla, he was working on free energy. JP Morgan may have pulled his financing because we couldn't put a meter on that free energy. And with free energy and these more advanced 3D printers that can print a handgun, well, hell, we could print anything we need for free with free energy and that. So how can we kind of, and you know, so maybe money becomes about control at the top, and maybe it becomes about controlling populations with debt and things like that. But so maybe that's the case. Maybe it's not the case. Maybe it's not so sinister. But the bottom line is, how can we get to the top here with guys like yourself and you know, whoever, George Soros or whoever it might be, and kind of try to release the control, get freedom back, get some technologies maybe out in the open that might give people more freedom? How can we work our way to the top and find out what's really going on, even beyond the government, beyond the lobbyists?
Well, Nicholas, first, you keep bringing up Soros. I want to repeat, I have not seen or spoken to the guy in over 38 years. Sure,
not him, so
then. Go talk to him if you want to.
Of course,
about it.
I understand.
I'm out of that. I'm totally, and have been for 38 years.
I understand.
If you want to know about the money, just go down there and ask the lobbyist. You know, he'll tell you what he needs and why he's going to the senator, the congressman, and saying, we want you to vote this way. Nearly every bill is full of things for somebody.
That's right.
Part of the problem is most of us don't read them, and certainly the congressmen don't even read them. You know, if you what was it? The Obamacare Act was thousands of pages, which they had to vote on that day. Nobody had read it. The head leader of the House, Nancy Pelosi, said, well, we got to pass this bill so we can find out what's in it. What kind of way is that to run anything? You wouldn't run a plumbing shop like that, much less a government, the largest government in the world, with the largest budget in the world. No, the money is always very clear. If somebody will just sit and figure it out. One of the first things I learned in my career on Wall Street was to figure out where the money is, and then you can figure out how to make money and how to invest. Who's going to make the money? Why are they going to make the money? What do they need to make the money? And then you can figure out, sometimes you get successful investments. And money, whether we like it or not, unless you're a holy man, Nicholas, or a mystic or a poet or something, we all care about money. Nearly everybody cares about money one way or the other. And like it or not, that's the motivation for most people. And that's why most of the things that happen. And there's this whole city full of lobbyists trying to make sure their people get the money. Not that you get the money, not that I get the money, but that their people get the money. And they usually do. That's why senators and congressmen retire rich.
That's right.
They don't retire rich on their salary. They retire rich on all the contributions.
And those bills are like, what, 20,000 pages sometimes? They don't even get a chance to read them. And so the question is, like, who's writing those? And where's this agenda coming from if it's not coming from the senators? And it's coming from the lobbyists then?
It's coming from the lobbyists, Nicholas. That's the way the system works now. A nice lady from Toledo gets elected to Congress. She goes to Congress, a wonderful woman, honest, hardworking. She gets down there and she finds out the way the system works is the lobbyists and the assistants, the congressional assistants, do most of the work, and they figure what things out. You, the nice lady from Toledo, has to spend most of your time raising money to run and doing things for your constituents. And the things you do for your constituents usually aren't the big issues that the lobbyists care about.
That's right. And of course they work for generally, I would say, corporations. I guess there may be some nonprofit lobbyists and things. So, and that, not that corporations are evil, they're trying to be represented, but it sounds like, yeah, a lot of nonsense going on there. So if certain corporations are involved and they have a board of directors, the shareholders own the company, but the board runs it, how do we get the boards of directors to kind of come clean about if they do have an agenda they are passing to their lobbyists, what that real agenda is, because building up all this debt and taking us certain ways that might not be the right way, how can we get them? How can we get them on our side? I mean, not that we want to demonize them. I mean, how can we kind of talk to them, the boards, the people that are really running the show?
Nicholas, I hope you can do that. A few
We would
years
love
ago,
to.
as you may remember, in California, they passed, I forget what proposition, whatever it was,
65.
saying couldn't raise debt. They couldn't. The debt had to be under control. The taxes couldn't go out of control. You know what? California is one of the most indebted states in the world right now, despite the fact that we pass these laws and tell them they have to act properly. They get around it. I mean, you figure out a way to solve it. I'm afraid the way throughout history that you've solved these problems is it leads to a crisis or a semi-crisis, and then you throw them all out. And then you guys come in and they learn, oh my gosh, we learned what happened before. We're not going to make those mistakes again. Things get better for a while, and then they start making new mistakes. They find other ways to mess the system up. You figure it out, Nicholas, and we'll kiss your feet.
No, I don't need anybody to kiss my feet. I guess it's going to have to be through forgiveness. We all do dumb things. I know I have. Maybe not Jim, but I certainly have. And you know, we all have things that it just seems like a pattern, almost a spiral pattern, where humans, they hide certain things, and they, you know, and there's always, and then it's not necessarily meant to be bad, but then it could spiral out of control. And I would say we definitely would agree. It seems like the government has spiraled out of control to the point where there's good people working in the government, but you know, the lobbyists might not even know the whole story. Hell, the shareholders might not. There's a lot of people not knowing exactly what's going on, and it kind of progresses. And it'd be great if people weren't persecuted for trying to talk about what could be some possible truths that everybody else isn't saying, right?
Well, Nicholas, again, the simple facts are, you can start with the spending situation.
Sure.
Every year for decades, there have been huge deficits. Many congressmen go there, many presidents and senators go there and say, I'm going to do something about the debt. Nobody, Nicholas, has done anything about the debt in your lifetime or mine. I mean, let's be serious. They all say it, but then there is nothing to stop them. And if somebody says, look, we need a new school in our town, I'm sure they need a new school in the town. Well, the congressman says, all right, I'll get you a school. Well, somebody has to pay for that school, you know, and unfortunately that keeps building up and building up over the decades, and now we're the large, no country's ever stopped without a problem or a crisis. And I don't like saying that, but you can read history and you'll see this has always led to a crisis or a semi-crisis for every country in history that's done this. And yes, I would like for you to go to Washington and say, guys, we have to stop it. Wow. There are plenty of people in Washington saying we've got to stop this. There are plenty of organizations that are saying we've got to stop it. And every congressman you speak to will agree with you. Yes, we have to stop it. Every senator, every presidential candidate will say, yes, we have to stop this. It cannot go on. Well, the facts are it keeps getting worse and worse.
I think the problem is they may be going to Washington, and if Washington's not actually controlling it and the lobbyists are controlling it, we may have to kind of try to appeal to some of the people working with the lobbyists maybe above that, and that could, I don't know if it's that easy. I don't know. So
let's do it. But
well, I don't know.
Chairman of all the corporations or universities or state governments or whatever, they would say, yeah, we have to stop it. But then he says, yeah, but by the way, we do need a new dorm here at the university, or the corporation would say, well, you got to change the tax law for this particular situation, otherwise things will be worse. They all take care of themselves. Now, Nicholas, that's what human beings do. We all take care of ourselves, otherwise the world wouldn't work at all. But unfortunately, there's no break, there's no constraint on the people in Washington that they can do whatever they need, because in the end, they're just getting the small thing they want, but it all adds up to the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. Figure out a way to stop them. Pass a constitutional amendment. They did that in California. California is still getting worse and worse and worse.
Well, and there's the Patriot Act, which is named nicely, but there's some goodies in there. Maybe some people don't agree with it, right? So there's always these names, and then sometimes, and it's a system. So we're hiring engineers in Venezuela to work on free energy, and that's what I'm trying to. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere, but I don't know. Maybe it would help. It seems to not be conducive to big business. I don't know. But you know, the thing is, I think in the libertarian idea, when you release control, I think it's all a mirage. And in fact, there's studies that, this universe and even the tables, 99.99% empty space, physicists say, and that this could be some sort of hologram. I mean, this is in like scientific journals. So it's very interesting. So this control thing that we all want, it's natural, especially when we think we're right, and we all think we're right. I've definitely thought I'm right when I'm not even. Sometimes I am, right? Hopefully, but we want to be right, and then it goes out of control, and yeah, we're selfish. I've been a selfish person too, so it's just very interesting. But Jim, you've been so successful, and so in terms of true success, so life beyond money, although the rents due, or the mortgages, or people have some, everything, we have to pay for things, right? So that's the reality. But beyond money and sort of getting into the meaning of life, what do you think, Jim, your greatest accomplishment is in life, and how can people truly be happy?
Well, I will tell you that my greatest accomplishment in life, I have two daughters. One is 9 and one is 14. Nicholas, all my life I was against having children. I thought children were a horrible waste of time, energy, money. I could not believe that anybody would be so foolish as to have a child. I used to feel so sorry for my friends who had children. It messed up their lives, and I was never, ever going to do something so foolish. Nicholas, I was totally 100% wrong about that. These two little girls are the most wonderful thing I've ever done. I've done a lot of good things in my life. I've certainly made plenty of mistakes, but there's nothing quite like these two little girls. Nicholas, if there's anybody listening to this who hasn't done it, I urge him to get home and get on with it. You cannot believe how much fun and how wonderful it is.
Well, and I know you wrote a great book, A Gift to My Children, A Father's Lesson for Life and Investing, which I really recommend to everybody. And how was that for you to write that book? Was that special for you?
Well, yeah, because I told you these were the most wonderful things, and I kept thinking, gosh, these are things I want them to know. And when you can't tell a 2-year-old some things, so I started writing things down. It actually started with a Japanese magazine. We would do a letter every month of things that I wanted my children to know. Next thing you know, it turned into a book, and now the book is being revised again. It's going to come out again. The Chinese came to me recently and said, oh, why don't you update that? So I added another 22,000 words recently, which will be published in November. It's going to be even better. It's a lot of fun. And again, these are things I want my children to know, but you cannot tell a 9-year-old. The 9-year-old has to read it when she's 21 or 19 or 29 to really understand the lessons.
Sure. And so what are some of those lessons? If you just were to pick a couple that stick out to you, you seem like a pretty open-minded guy, but you live in China. I mean, you've done so many things that people couldn't, you went to China, I think it was in the 80s, and you saw the opportunity in the 80s. But what would you recommend to your daughters, and then you put it in your book basically to everybody? What are some of those things that...
Because the short version, the most important thing I'm trying to teach them is to think independently and to be curious and think independently. If you can think independently, first of all, you can be curious. Most people aren't. If they see on the television that X, Y, Z is happening, they say, oh, X, Y, Z is happening. They don't start to think about it and ask questions and be curious about what's really going on, and because they don't think independently. Most people do not think independent. It's very easy to go along with the crowd and do what everybody else does. So I'm trying to teach them to be very curious about everything, think independently, figure out the real answers, and that's the way to live your life. And I'm also trying to teach them to beware of boys.
Well, that's very true. I would agree. I have a sister that's 27. She's married now, but all my kids, all my friends have kids. I'm 36, so it's at that age. It's not. I'm not against them, but I definitely know what you're saying because the kids are very young, and there's a lot of work. It's not like it doesn't look like a goldfish type of job, you know. But when you kind of talk to your kids, or when you think about consciousness, about the sort of maybe even the meaning of life, or I mean, Jim, do you ever have any thoughts about, you know, there's so many studies on near-death experiences now. You know, there's thousands of people. I mean, mainstream science is studying near-death experiences. Do you ever think about, and you know, NASA came out now and said Mars was almost completely covered with water at one point. It said there's trillions of galaxies and billions of Earth-like planets per galaxy, and that's NASA. You know, and they're supposed to be the official agency. Who knows what else, what other info there may be. But do you ever think about, like, kind of the meaning of life and consciousness? And have you ever any thoughts about that, Jim?
Well, the meaning for my life, well, my kids.
Sure.
My meaning for life right now, these two little girls. But we can get into religion or philosophy or any of these spirituality or other things you want. If I had a simple answer, it would be to fulfill yourself to the most you can, whether that's being happy or being a monk or whatever it happens to be, you know, being a dutiful Buddhist, a dutiful Christian, whatever it happens to be. That's most people, many people go through life without ever achieving any kind of happiness or salvation, if you will. If you can achieve happiness, if you can do what you want and live the life you want, that's going to lead to, in my view, that's going to lead some kind of happiness and fulfillment down the line. Many people never do it. It's a shame. Many people never ever do it because they go along with the crowd, or they do what their parents say, or their teachers, or their friends. They never really break out and do what they know and love, know what they would love.
And what could give somebody the courage to do that, Jim? A lot of people, there's so much fear going on. You know, you've done so much. I mean, you just bucked the trend. You had courage. People want that courage. They want to just say, man, I want to get out there. I want to go on a bike around the world. I mean, what did it for you? What do you recommend?
Well, I guess I was just too foolish. I wasn't smart enough to know I couldn't do these things. I wanted to do them, and so I set out to do them. It was one of my childhood dreams, believe it or not, was to go around the world on a motorcycle. I can't believe I did it, but I did it. I wanted it because I grew up in a small backwoods town. I wanted to see the world. I wanted adventure. I wanted to know the world. Who knew that I would ever do it, Nicholas? Something that I was a 15-year-old boy there in the backwoods of Alabama saying foolish things like this, and I did it. I don't know. I just didn't know enough not to. I guess one of the reasons is I didn't have kids early, because that certainly would have been a constraint on me, and it certainly was on my parents, for instance. I don't know if my parents started having children when they were in their early 20s. That's a constraint. I know it's a big constraint, which is one reason I didn't want to do it. If I had had children when I was 20 or 30 or 40, it would have been bad for me, for the wife, for the kids, for everybody. So in my case, I waited and did a lot of other things I wanted to do first, and then I had the kids, and that's the best part. I was wrong about children. I repeat, I was wrong about children. Go do it.
Is your assistant recording you that you said you're wrong? If I may have some employees that might like to
Don't worry.
record me saying I'm wrong. Go ahead, sorry.
I've said it many times.
Oh,
many
good.
times.
Yeah, me too. Actually, I've been wrong a lot, and I ask for forgiveness. But so you, Jim, if somebody's scared, so I agree. I mean, I couldn't have taken some of the risks that I took. I've only been to 34 countries, but I definitely resonate with you, and I couldn't have taken some of those risks, especially because I was wrapped up in that real estate when I was young, and then 2008 came, and I got, you know, it wasn't so good for me, but I took some risks, and I was able to, but because of what you're saying, if I had a family, it would have been kind of not very good. It would have been almost, yeah, it would have been kind of bad for them and reckless, I would say. But what if somebody's afraid? If somebody's afraid to be happy, to live their life to the fullest, And so I think what I hear you saying is don't overthink it, right? Sometimes just kind of go with the flow and just do it.
Well, I'm partially saying that. What I tell people all the time is, look, you're going to wake up one day when you're 75, and it will be, to me, it would have been worse never to have tried than to sit there when I'm 75 and say, gosh, I always wanted to play center field for the New York Yankees, but I never tried. Whatever the dream was, whatever people really, really wanted to do. And I saw that in people, that they never tried. And I will tell you, it's better to try and fail. It's better to try and fail than wake up when you're 75 with a lifetime of regrets that you never tried. And even if you fail, Nicholas, that teaches you a lot. Some of the greatest success stories of history have been people who failed once or twice. And then they had the resilience to come back. The one word I'm trying to teach my daughters is perseverance. We all know plenty of smart people who are not successful. We know educated people are not successful. Talented people are not successful. Beautiful, attractive people are not successful. The ones who are successful are the ones who persevere, who never give up. And that's what I'm trying to say to them. Don't worry about failing. Don't worry about failing. Just if you fail, just don't give up and persevere. And so I would say, I tell people all the time, I know the problem. I heard every word you said. And many people say, I cannot do it. I cannot. It wouldn't work. What if it didn't work? What would my mother say? What would my teachers say? What would my friends say? Well, it's better to have tried it and failed than to wake up one day at age 75 and say, I never even tried.
Well, I agree with you, Jim. We actually had some I'm trying now. I'm here in the middle of the night, and I'm honored. And we had some technical problem before the show, and I'm thinking, because we couldn't hear the Skype audio, all kinds of bullshit going on. And it's it's my fault. I'm the owner, and I'm thinking, so the fear. I'm like, what can I do? Just do something. So I downloaded some Skype recorder real quick, paid for it. You didn't even. I like to be on time. I think we were only 3 minutes late, but to me that sucks. But and you know what? That stuff happens, man. You got to try, because it's just an honor for us to have you on the show, but you got to just try, and sometimes it might not work, but you got to try. Is that right?
Nicholas, it's my honor to be here. Try again. If it, as the poem my children can recite by heart, if at first you don't succeed, try again. They know the whole thing.
Well, I love that. I want to ask you one last question, and then we'll let you get back to your awesome life there in Singapore. It's a beautiful day. It looks like. I saw you out with your bike. Now, Bitcoin, I heard you say before, because of course you're an expert investor of the, like the best in the world, in my opinion. Bitcoin, you kind of said, it looks bubblish. When you see the kind of price action in Bitcoin, now you're having ICOs, at least one a week, and it looks kind of bubblish. Now it did just go over 4,000. I guess it's the highest ever. And what I really wonder, maybe somewhat of a unique angle on this question for you, Jim. When you think about gold, because I know, of course, the idea is that you're talking about the biggest crisis of our lifetime coming economically. Generally, people buy gold. I think you've said that you're going to wait maybe until the crash and buy gold. But Bitcoin is interesting because it's decentralized. We talked a lot about governments. They're trying to, control everything. Is Bitcoin a good alternative long-term to gold? Is it something else? I know in China it's big as well. Is that right?
Well, Nicholas, don't listen to me. I don't own any Bitcoins. Bitcoin in the last 8 years has gone from nothing to $4,400 a Bitcoin or whatever it is. So don't ask me. I completely missed it. I do own gold. My plan, if it works this way, is if gold goes down again, to buy a lot of gold, because before this is over, whenever people have lose faith in money or in governments, they've turned to gold and silver. Now maybe they're going to turn to Bitcoin this time. I don't know. But back to the bubblish situation.
Sure.
If I just gave you a chart of Bitcoin and showed you how it's racing up, hundreds of dollars every few weeks or every few months, and I showed you what you said, oh yeah, and there are hundreds more, another 1,000 have come out in the last year or two. If I just described that situation, whether we were talking about commodities or stock, whatever we were talking about, history would say that's a problem. That's a problem in formation. Now, I am not the one to talk about Bitcoin because I never bought a single one, to my embarrassment, but I can look at the facts. And if you go back to every bubble in history and you describe those facts, you would be describing previous bubbles. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not going to be great opportunities in Bitcoin. Many markets have had bubbles and collapsed. You know, railroads. Well, we still have railroads. Were a gigantic bubble 150 years ago. But we still have railroads. A lot of people made a lot. Computers, electricity, radio, television. We've had huge bubbles in a lot of things. People still have telephones. They still have computers. So if you buy in the bubble, you often lose money. But if you buy at the right time, even if it's in a bubble for a while, you come out on top. And I hope that I can get gold or Bitcoin or whatever it is right.
And do you think that these government, the decentralized part is good for the world in the fact that, you know, maybe the banks have gotten out of control? I mean, is this a good alternative, or could the banks and the governments just wipe out Bitcoin as well?
Well, you know as well as I do that if the governments make it illegal to use Bitcoin, and governments don't like losing control, it's going to be complicated for people to use Bitcoin. You know as well as I do that the governments can close down computers. And without computers, there is no Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. If you think that the governments aren't going to keep things for themselves, then please go back and read some more history, because the governments are in for themselves first. They say they're in it for the people, but they're in it for themselves. And if Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies take a life of their own, the governments cannot control, and that's the plan, of course. That's the great attraction. There's no politician in the history of the world that's going to sit around and say, that's a good thing. Take control away from us. You have a decentralized, independent system. They have always, and I hope that Bitcoin or somebody can come up a way to take control away from governments, but they can control they can control the computers. They can control the internet ultimately. They can make it illegal to do things like that. Now, of course, there'll be black markets. There always have. Governments have always made many things illegal, and there have been black markets, and people have found ways around them. I hope this is going to be the one that finally breaks governments. It would be wonderful if we could find some way to, what you and I were talking about several minutes ago. Figure out a way to break the governments, and we'll all be better off.
Well, I think that the whole thing with them thinking that, I just think the control is an illusion. I think there's more. You know, you look at near-death experience studies with thousands of people going through some mainstream scientific studies. There's more than just this life going on. You know, people have different ideas. If we could get the emphasis on control off and away from the governments, and that, you know, maybe money is used to trade, but there's free energy. And so you actually just use it to trade, and you can print almost anything you need with free energy. Who knows? Maybe there's not a big incentive to control, because I do think people want to be free, like you said, Jim. So people want to be free, and maybe Bitcoin's just a step towards that, but I think people want to be free. That's when they're the happiest, right?
Okay, Nicholas, your assignment now is to figure out a way to take control away from the government. You go home and you have a week. You have a month. You have the rest of the year. You have the rest of the year to figure it out. Okay, we're all waiting.
Well, we will. We'll contact you again. We're going to have an event. Maybe it's going to be called the International Love Congress. We're going to try to get the heads of religions, heads of government. Who knows who's going to show up? And if this thing's got to happen, we're still human. Well, that's our show, ladies and gentlemen. Jim Rogers, he's a legend. There's so much great insight we learned. You know, we're trying to do something. We want to invite everybody in, no matter what you think. Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, everybody. People that don't care about any of this. People that like cat videos. People that don't, you know, whatever you think. We love you. We love you. Wake up. We love you. Wake up. We love you. Let's find some harmony, but let's talk about the tough issues. There are some really, really tough issues that Jim and I discussed. And it was an honor to have somebody who's really, in my opinion, one of the smartest men in the world, especially when it comes to money and business, join us for this episode of Believe. So just share the links. That's all we ask you to do. If you'd like, join our community. Comment on the videos. We're just starting out. Our website is www.believe.love. YouTube is youtube.com/Believe Loves You. iTunes, believeitunes.com. Android, believeandroid.com. Heck, we even started an Instagram. I think it's instagram.com/Believe Loves You. Send us an email, believe@believe.love. Let us know what you thought about the interview. We have so many hosts. We're adding reporters. We're going to have live callers, and we're just trying to help the world whatever way we can and help to harmonize things and get going with some solutions and not just all this complaining that, of course, we all love to do. It's very easy to do. Thanks so much for joining us on Believe. Have a great day or night wherever you may be.